My name is Rion Sato, and I am not a good person. I know that. I have always known that. It is not something I say to be dramatic or to invite people to tell me otherwise. It is just a fact I carry around the way some people carry old coins in their pockets, heavy, worn, smooth, always there. Growing up as the second son of a family that was slowly, publicly, painfully falling apart will do that to you. My father was a businessman who believed that strength was the only currency worth holding. My older brother, Daiichi, was the golden son who had learned to perform that strength without feeling it. And I was the one who actually felt everything but refused to show it, which is perhaps the worst combination a person can have. By the time I was 22, I had built walls around myself that I was genuinely proud of. I did not ask for help. I did not admit weakness. I did not cry, at least not anywhere anyone could see. I'd watched my mother cry enough for both of us over the years, at the dinner table, over unpaid bills, over my father's face when another deal fell through. And I had decided a long time ago that tears did not fix anything. What fixed things, I believed, was pressure, pushing back, taking what you needed before someone else could take it first. That belief is what brought me to the Matsuri Holdings building on a Tuesday morning in October, with rage in my chest and absolutely no plan in my head. Matsuri Holdings. The name alone was enough to make half the city straighten their backs. It was everywhere. On buildings, on company signs, on the lips of every business journalist and finance student in the country. The Matsuri family had been running their empire for 3 generations, and the current heir, Kai Matsuri, had stepped into operations at 19 after his father's health had begun to decline. People whispered about him in the way they whisper about things that both impress and unsettle them. He was 24 now. He had already restructured 2 divisions, ended 4 bad partnerships, and tripled the company's international portfolio. He had also, for the past 3 years, been quietly and consistently rejecting my family's merger proposals. 4 proposals. 4 rounds of my father sitting across from Matsuri Holdings representatives with his best suit on and his best numbers prepared, only to receive polite, thorough, unarguable rejections. The kind that leave no room for negotiation because they have already anticipated every counter-argument. The kind that feel less like a no and more like a door being closed very softly in your face while someone on the other side says, "Have a lovely day." My father was a proud man, the kind of pride that does not survive being dismissed that many times. The night before I went to the Matsuri building, I found him at the kitchen table at midnight. The house was quiet. My mother had gone to bed early. Daiichi was out. My father was sitting alone with a glass of water he had not touched, staring at nothing in particular, and I watched him from the doorway for a long time before I realized that his shoulders were shaking. My father was crying. I had never seen that before. Not once in 22 years, not when we lost the house in Northgate and moved to the smaller apartment, not when my mother got sick that winter 4 years ago, not ever. I went to bed. I lay in the dark for 3 hours. And somewhere in those 3 hours, something in me broke open in the wrong direction. I drove to the Matsuri building the next morning without showering, without eating, without telling anyone. I did not have a plan. I had my father's face and my own fury and the specific, such in particular blindness that comes from caring too much and knowing too little about how to handle it. The lobby of Matsuri Holdings was clean and enormous, with high ceilings and the kind of quiet that costs money. The receptionist at the front desk was polished and professional. She smiled when I walked in. "Good morning. Do you have an appointment?" "No," I said, and kept walking. "Sir." She was already reaching for the phone. I took the elevator before she could say more. The 15th floor was where the senior operations team sat. I had done enough background reading to know that. The elevator opened to a carpeted hallway, soft lighting, large windows showing the city below. A young assistant with round glasses stood up from her desk when she saw me come off the elevator with the specific energy of someone who was not supposed to be there. "Can I help you?" she said, and her voice was already bracing for a problem. "Kai Matsuri," I said. "Where is his office?" "Mr. Matsuri is not available for unscheduled meetings. If you'd like to make an appointment." "I will not be here long," I said, and looked past her at the glass-walled office at the end of the hall. I could see him through the glass. He was at his desk, reading, a pen in his hand. The morning light caught the side of his face. He looked like a person who had absolutely nothing to worry about, and that image, that picture of total calm while my father sat crying alone in a kitchen at midnight, undid the last thread of restraint I had. I walked past the assistant before she could stop me. She called my name. She must have gotten it from the lobby, but I was already pushing open the glass door. The office was large, ordered, and exactly what I expected. Expensive without being showy, functional without being cold. Floor-to-ceiling windows, a wide desk, shelves of neatly organized files, and Kai Matsuri, looking up from his reading with dark, steady eyes, in a wheelchair positioned precisely in front of his desk. I had known that. The whole city knew that. 3 years ago, a car accident had taken the use of his legs. The accident had happened on the same night his father had been hospitalized for the first time, a fact that the press had treated as dramatic irony, but which I had always thought was just cruel. The whisper network in business circles had never really stopped murmuring about what it meant for the company's future. I had heard people say, at my father's dinner table, that Matsuri Holdings would soften, that the heir could not possibly sustain his father's pace from a chair, that there was opportunity in that weakness. None of those people had ever actually been in a room with Kai Matsuri. I understood that the instant he looked at me. There was nothing soft about him. At least nothing that suggested he had spent 3 years feeling sorry for himself or adjusting his expectations downward. He was wearing a simple dark shirt. His posture was straight. His expression was the kind of still that does not happen by accident. It happens because a person has trained themselves to be the calmest thing in any room, so that everyone else has to match their temperature. He looked at me the way you look at a problem you have already half solved. "Rian Sato," he said. "My family's time for 3 years. My family's time for 3 years. 4 proposals. 4 rejections with no real explanation, no counteroffer, nothing. My father has given everything trying to make this work, and your people keep sending back these polished little letters that say nothing. I want an actual answer." He held my gaze for a moment. Then he set his pen down, folded his hands on the desk, and said, with perfect, infuriating patience, "The answer has been given 4 times. Your family's financials do not support a merger at this stage. The liability ratio in your current holdings creates too much risk for our stakeholders. We have outlined this in each response." Those letters said nothing about liability ratios. They said it clearly. You may not have had someone capable of reading them. He picked up his pen again. "If you would like a more detailed explanation, schedule a formal meeting through our offices. Otherwise, please close the door on your way out." He went back to writing. He went back to writing. I stood there and watched him write, and something in my brain went completely white. Every sleepless night, every dinner where my father came home looking smaller than the last time, every conversation I'd overheard between my parents at 2 in the morning, talking in low voices about what they would do if this did not work, all of it rose up in me at once, and I did something I cannot explain and cannot excuse. I walked to the desk, I leaned forward, and I kissed him. It lasted maybe 2 seconds. It was not tender. It was not even really a kiss so much as a collision. Angry and stupid, and the single worst decision I had made in a life that already contained several bad ones. When I pulled back, no word for. I laughed. The hollow, no word for. I laughed. The hollow performance kind of laugh, and I said, "Come up here and teach me a lesson then." The silence that came after was absolute. Kai Matsuri looked at me for a long, long moment. His expression had settled back into that careful, unreadable calm. Then he said softly and with total clarity, "Get out of my office." I left. The elevator ride down was the longest of my life. I walked out of the lobby, sat in my car, and stared at the steering wheel for 40 minutes without moving. The rage was gone. Completely gone. Like it had never been there, replaced by something colder and more permanent. What I had done was not a power move. It was not a statement. It was assault. It was wrong in the way that very few things are unambiguously, completely, no argument wrong. I had been in pain, and I had taken it out on a person who had done nothing to me personally except exist, and say no, and be calm about it. I drove home. I told no one. I spent the rest of that day feeling like I had swallowed something toxic. 3 days later, a letter arrived from Matsuri Holdings. My hands shook a little when I opened it, expecting legal language, a restraining order, a threat of some kind. It was a job offer. Junior partnership position, starting the following Monday. Assigned to the Northgate development project under direct senior supervision. Competitive salary. The letter was signed personally by Kai Matsuri. I read it 6 times. Then I sat down on the floor of my hallway and stared at the ceiling. I should have said no. Any reasonable person would have said no. Any reasonable person would have recognized this as the setup for something complicated and uncomfortable and possibly humiliating, and declined. I called my father. He made a sound I had not heard from him in years. Genuine relief, bordering on joy. I accepted the offer. I told myself it was for my family. I told myself I could handle whatever game Kai Matsuri was playing. I was about to find out exactly how wrong I was about my own ability to stay unaffected. Monday arrived cold and gray, like the city itself had decided to set the mood. I was up at 5:30. I spent 20 minutes longer than necessary picking what to wear, which I refused to analyze. I chose a dark suit, a plain tie, and the shoes my mother had given me for my 20th birthday because they were the nicest thing I owned. I left my apartment at 7, walked to the bus stop even though the bus took longer than driving, and spent the ride telling myself that I was completely calm and professional and fully prepared for whatever this was going to be. By the time the Matsuri Holdings building came into view, I had convinced myself about 60% of the way. Which was not great, but it was something. The lobby receptionist handed me a proper employee badge this time. White lanyard, my name printed neatly. I took it with both hands, because for some reason that felt like the correct level of respect for a thing that was currently serving as evidence that I had somehow talked my way into a second chance I did not deserve. The 15th floor was already active. Staff moved between desks with the focused, efficient energy of people who genuinely liked their work. 2 people looked up when I stepped off the elevator and offered small, professional nods. The assistant from the previous week, the one with round glasses who I had walked past without a word, looked at me over the top of her frames with an expression that said very clearly she remembered me. I was surprised she did not say anything. Later I would learn that her name was Mina, and she had worked for Kai for 3 years and was, in every way that mattered, completely unflappable. "Rayon Sato," she said, standing from her desk. "Welcome. I'll show you to your office." My office was a reasonable room with glass walls on two sides, a desk that was already stocked with supplies, and a view that looked out over the north side of the city. I could see, very distantly, the rooftops of Northgate from the window. I stood there for a moment longer than I should have, looking at those rooftops, before Mina's voice pulled me back. "Mr. Matsuri wants to see you before you start on anything," she said pleasantly. "Whenever you're ready." There it was. I put my bag down, straightened my jacket, took one breath that I hoped Mina did not notice, though from the way she turned away at exactly that moment, I think she probably did. His office looked the same as it had last week. Same morning light, same neat shelves, same wide desk, same Kai Matsuri, reading, pen in hand. He did not look up when I came in. I stood in front of his desk and waited, because that seemed like the right thing to do when the person behind the desk had every reason in the world to not be in a hurry for you. He finished his page, set the document aside, and looked up. His expression was professionally neutral. Not cold, not warm. The particular blankness of someone who has decided that this interaction begins now with no history attached to it. "Sit down," he said. I sat. He folded his hands on the desk. "You'll be working on the Northgate development project. It is a mixed-use residential and commercial development on the city's north edge. Planning has been underway for 3 years. Investment is projected at $200 million, and the project is currently stalled due to a land rights dispute with a community organization called the Northgate Residents Alliance. Your role is to assist with negotiations and documentation." He paused. "You will report to me at 8 every morning. Written progress notes are due by 5 each evening. For any client meetings I assign you to, you will attend, you will observe, and you will not speak unless I specifically ask for your input. Is that understood?" "Yes," I said. "If you are late, you send word in advance. If you miss a deadline without communication, we have a problem. If you behave in any way that creates a liability for this company or its people, you will be removed immediately." He let that sit for a second. "Questions?" I had approximately 40 questions. The largest one was still why he had given me this job at all. But his eyes were holding mine with that particular steadiness that was somehow both an invitation and a warning. And I found that I did not want to be the person who showed up on the first day already demanding explanations. "No questions," I said. He nodded. "Mina has your project files. Start today." I stood. "Sato." I stopped. "This is a professional space," he said. His voice was still even, still calm. But there was something underneath it that I felt rather than heard, a kind of deliberateness, like every word had been chosen specifically. "Whatever happened before you walked through those doors is not something I intend to bring into this building. But I will hold you to the same standard I hold everyone here. You will be treated accordingly, and I will expect the same from you." He looked back at his papers. I walked out and stood in the hallway for a moment, processing what had just happened. He had just, as calmly as a man discussing weather forecasts, told me that the incident from the previous week was tabled. Not forgiven, not forgotten, tabled. Professionally sealed and set aside. Which was possibly the most disorienting response I could have received, because it gave me absolutely nothing to push against. I went to my office, sat down, and opened the project files Mina had left on my desk. The Northgate situation was messier than the brief summary suggested. The Northgate Residents Alliance had formed 2 years ago, specifically in response to the development announcement. Their core concern was cultural displacement. The neighborhood had a long-established market district, several decades-old small businesses, and a specific community identity that they believed the development in its current form would erase. Every proposal Matsuri Holdings had sent them focused on financial compensation, relocation packages, land value assessments, projected increases in area property values. Every proposal had been rejected. I read through the rejection letters carefully. They were polite but firm, and one phrase appeared in nearly all of them. The proposal does not demonstrate an understanding of what this community represents. I sat back in my chair and thought about that. By the end of the week, I had gone through every document in the file twice. I had started a separate notebook of observations, questions, gaps in the research, things that did not add up about the current negotiation approach. I wrote a short summary of what I thought the underlying problem was and left it in my nightly progress report on Thursday evening, tucked at the end after the standard updates. Not sure if Kai would even read that far. At our 8 o'clock meeting on Friday, he set his coffee down and said, "Your Thursday note. The part about cultural displacement versus financial displacement. Explain your thinking." I did. I talked for 5 minutes straight, expecting him to interrupt or redirect. He did not. He sat completely still and listened, and when I finished, he said nothing for about 10 seconds, which felt longer than it was. Then, "That is a useful observation. Continue developing it." He moved to the next item on his list. I left that meeting walking half an inch taller than when I'd gone in, which was ridiculous, and I knew it was ridiculous. But some part of me that had been waiting for him to be cruel, to use the work as a way to diminish me, exhaled very quietly. The work itself was absorbing in a way I had not expected. I had spent most of my career so far in operational support roles at my family's company, useful but narrow. This was different. Every day brought something new to think through, some new angle on the problem. I started arriving at 7:45 instead of 8. I started staying later. On the second Wednesday, I was in the kitchen on the 15th floor making my third coffee of the day at 8:15 in the evening when Kai came in. He stopped when he saw me. I stopped when I saw him. We had never been in a small space together before. The kitchen was not large. He moved his chair to the counter and reached for the kettle without saying anything. I stepped slightly to the left so he had more room. "You're still here," he said. Not an accusation, just an observation. "Working through the Alliance correspondence," I said. "There's a letter from 18 months ago that I think got misread by whoever handled it. The phrasing matters." He poured water into his cup, something dark and herbal rather than coffee. "Which letter?" I told him the date. Something changed very slightly in his expression. "Bring it to the meeting tomorrow," he said. "Okay." He moved toward the door, then paused. "Go home after this cup," he said without turning back. "Tired people miss things." I stood in the kitchen alone after he left, holding my coffee, and felt something strange and quiet settle in my chest. It took me a moment to identify it. It was the feeling of being seen as a person whose well-being mattered, even slightly, to someone who had no particular reason to care. I finished my coffee. I went home, and I thought about that feeling for a very long time before I slept. The third week brought rain, cold, and the first real test. Director Ohara Setsuko of the Northgate Residents Alliance sent a formal letter on Tuesday morning. It was addressed to Matsuri Holdings leadership and stated, in language that was courteous but had iron underneath every sentence, that the alliance was suspending all further negotiations until the company demonstrated what she called a genuine understanding of community values, not financial convenience. She also listed, at the end, 3 specific concerns that had never been addressed in any prior proposal. The fate of the Sunday market that had run for 40 years, the lease security of 11 small business owners who had been in the neighborhood for over 2 decades, and the preservation of a community gathering space currently used by neighborhood cultural groups. I read the letter standing at Mina's desk and went directly to Kai's office without being asked. He looked up when I came in. I put the letter on his desk without a word. He read it. I watched his face. His expression did not shift dramatically, but there was a stillness that came over him that was different from his normal stillness. The kind that means something has registered more deeply than a person is ready to show. "Sit down," he said. I sat. "Your assessment," he said. "She is not wrong," I said. "Everything we have sent them has been about money. Compensation for displacement, projected increases in local income, tax revenue numbers. It has all been correct, technically, but it reads like we sat in a boardroom and decided what the neighborhood should care about, rather than asking them." I paused. The three concerns she listed at the end of that letter, those are not negotiating tactics. Those are the actual things. The market, the businesses, the gathering space. If we address those directly and seriously, with real contractual protections rather than vague language about community sensitivity, she would come back to the table. Kai was quiet for a moment. He set the letter down, aligned it precisely with the edge of his desk, and looked at me. "You grew up in Northgate," he said. I felt the air shift slightly. "You looked into me." "I research everyone who works for me. No apology in it, just fact. East side of Northgate, age 5 to 16. Your family's first apartment was on Kinji Street. You moved after the rent was raised 3 consecutive years." I held his gaze and said nothing. "So you understand what she is protecting," he said. "Yes." I thought about the Sunday market, the specific smell of it on cold mornings, the vendors who knew everyone's names, the way it made a neighborhood feel like a neighborhood and not just a collection of dresses. I thought about the ramen shop where old man Fuji had a rule. If you were a kid eating alone, you always got extra noodles. No charge, no explanation. He just did it. "Then I want you to lead the next contact with the Alliance," Kai said. I looked at him. "I'm the most junior person on this project. You are also the only person on this project who has ever stood in that market on a Sunday morning." He held my gaze. "That is worth more than seniority at this particular table." I did not know what to say to that. "Can you do it?" he asked. "Yes," I said. He nodded. "Then do it." I spent the next 3 days drafting an outreach letter. Not a formal proposal, just a letter. From me, personally, introducing myself, being honest about where I came from, and asking if we could meet as people before we met again, as representatives of competing interests. I included 3 specific items: a proposal for a legally binding community space guarantee written into the development contract, a lease protection clause for any business operating in Northgate for more than 10 years, and a formal structure that would preserve the Sunday market permanently within the redesigned development footprint. On the 4th day, Director O'Hara agreed to meet. When I told Kai, he was in the middle of signing a document. He paused. He looked up at me. And for just a moment, one very quick, very small moment, something warm passed across his face before he carefully put it away. "Good," he said. 2 words. I replayed them more often than I would like to admit. The negotiation took place on a Thursday afternoon in a meeting room at the Alliance's Community Center, which was a deliberately chosen venue and one I respected them for. I went alone, which had surprised everyone else on the team. Kai had approved it without comment. Director O'Hara was a woman in her early 50s with short, gray-streaked hair and the kind of eyes that had seen enough professional theater to be entirely unimpressed by it. She shook my hand. poured 2 cups of tea without asking if I wanted any, and sat across from me. "Tell me about yourself before we talk about buildings," she said. So I did. I told her about Kenji Street, about the Sunday market, about the ramen shop and old man Fuji, and the feeling of belonging to a place even when that place did not technically belong to you. I talked for 10 minutes, and she listened with her hands folded around her teacup and her eyes steady on mine. Then she said, "Why are you working for the company that wants to change all of that?" I thought about it honestly before I answered. Because I think it is possible to build something new without erasing what already exists there, I said. And because if I am not in the room, someone will be who does not know what that market smells like in October. She looked at me for a long moment. Then she picked up my proposal letter and started reading it properly for the first time. We talked for 2 hours. She asked hard questions and I answered them directly. By the end, she had not agreed to everything, but she had circled 3 clauses and said she would take them to the Alliance Board. That was more progress than 3 years of formal proposals had achieved. Walking back to the office in the evening rain, I called Kai. He picked up on the second ring, which told me he had been waiting. "She circled 3 clauses," I said. "She's taking them to the board. She wants a follow-up meeting in 2 weeks. A pause on the line. Then, 2 weeks is fine. Write up the full account tonight while it is fresh." "I will." Another pause, slightly longer. "You did well today." Rion. My name again. Quiet, precise, like he had decided it was allowed now. I stood on the wet pavement outside the office building with rain coming down around me and did not move for a full minute. That night, at 11:30, my phone buzzed with a message from the number I had saved as K. "Old man Fuji still has the shop. I checked last week. He gives extra noodles to the junior staff who look like they missed dinner. You should visit sometime." I stared at that message for a very long time. I typed back, "Did you go there because of the project or because you wanted to?" The reply came after 3 minutes. "Go to sleep, Sato." I went to sleep smiling and told absolutely no one. The secret I stumbled onto was not supposed to be mine to find. I want to be honest about how it happened, because the easiest version of the story is that I was clever in investigating and saw things clearly. The true version is that I was in the wrong place at the right time, heard something I was not supposed to hear, and then could not unfind it. It was a Thursday evening in the 4th week. I had left my personal notebook in my car, the blue one I used for non-work thoughts, which I had started filling with observations about the Northgate project that did not fit into the official reports. I took the elevator to level 3 of the parking garage at around 6:40, stepped out, and immediately heard voices from somewhere in the far corner of the level. I stopped. Sound carries in parking garages. Both voices were male. One I recognized immediately as Kai's. The other was unfamiliar, older, by the weight of it, and carrying the specific tightness of a person who is angry, but has decided to perform restraint. "3 years of patience," the unfamiliar voice said. "Your father's arrangement was not informal. It was documented, initialed. The intention was clear." "My father was not well when he initialed anything in that period," Kai said. His voice was completely steady. I had heard that steadiness in meetings before, the specific kind that cost more than it looks like. Any agreement signed under those circumstances would not survive legal scrutiny. That is your interpretation. It is my legal team's interpretation, and the court's. You are a child managing a company from a wheelchair, the other man said, and the viciousness in it made the back of my neck go cold. The optics alone will... The optics of Matsuri Holdings are determined by its financials and its results, Kai said, both of which I am confident you have reviewed before coming here tonight. Have your legal team send formal documentation. Mine will respond within the statutory window. Have a good evening. Wheels on concrete. I stepped behind a support column without thinking about it. Fast, automatic. Kai passed about 12 meters away, moving toward the accessible exit. He did not look sideways. The other man left through the stairwell door, walking in the clipped, tight-legged way of someone who had not gotten what he came for but was not finished trying. I stood alone in the garage for a long time. Someone was threatening Kai. Not the kind of corporate posturing that happened in negotiation rooms. This was something structural, something that had been building for years, something the other man had come to this parking garage specifically to make felt. And Kai had faced it alone, in a half-empty garage, after hours, with nobody knowing. All project team members had access to, and I looked for the oldest entry. I had noticed, very early in my first week, a folder labeled with a date from 3 years ago. I had not opened it then, because it seemed like it belonged to a history that was not my business. Tonight I opened it. The folder contained a single document. Was initialed, not fully signed, but was initialed. Not fully signed, but initialed at every page, in the handwriting of a man whose name I recognized as Kai's father. I read it twice to make sure I understood what I was seeing. Kuroe Partners had provided Matsuri Holdings with a significant cash injection 3 years ago, during a period the document described as temporary operational liquidity pressure. In exchange, Kuro Partners received a minority shareholding that appeared passive, non-voting, limited in scope. However, buried in the third section, under a heading that used the phrase conversion provisions, there was a clause that could, under specific circumstances, convert that passive stake into a controlling majority vote. The triggering condition was any formal transfer of primary controlling ownership from the current principal stakeholder. I sat back and translated that into plain language. As long as Kai's father remained the official primary shareholder of record, even if he was incapacitated and unable to exercise that role, the conversion clause could not be triggered. The moment his father formally transferred or relinquished those shares, whether through death or legal transfer to Kai, Crow Partners could activate the clause and become majority owners of Matsuri Holdings, which meant Kai had been deliberately, carefully, indefinitely delaying formalizing control of his own company in order to prevent a hostile takeover. And the reason he could not formalize control was sitting in a care facility somewhere, still technically the principal shareholder, no longer able to make decisions. I sat at my desk until midnight. I did not turn on the light. The city outside the window did all the illuminating. There were 3 things I knew by the time I stood up. 1. Kai already knew all of this. He was not someone who missed things, and this had been in his own company's archive. He had been managing it, alone, quietly, for what sounded like years. 2. Whoever had come to that parking garage tonight was connected to Kuro Partners. The language matched. The threat matched. 3. I had accessed this file without permission. If I brought it to Kai, I would have to tell him that. I decided, standing in the dark at my desk with the city spread out below me and the hum of the empty office around me, that I would rather be honest and face his anger than say nothing and watch him carry something this heavy alone. The next morning at our 8 o'clock meeting, I watched him go through the Northgate update with the same precise, collected energy he always brought. Hair neat, voice steady, eyes clear. Everything about him looked composed and fine, and I thought, he has been holding this for so long that holding it feels normal now. You look tired, he said, about midway through without looking up. I stayed late, I said. He looked up at that. Something in his eyes moved, not quite concern, but adjacent to it. You should not make a habit of that. I found something I needed to think through. A pause. His pen was still. About the project? No, I said carefully. About the company. The stillness that came over him was different from his normal stillness. Come back at 6, he said after a moment. My last meeting ends at 5:30. Okay. He looked back at his papers, but his pen did not move again for the rest of the meeting. At 5:58, Mina knocked on my office door and said, "He's ready for you." The floor was mostly empty. The late light came in long and gold across the carpet. Kai's office door was open slightly, which was unusual. He usually kept it closed after 5. I took it as a deliberate signal and walked in. He was at his desk, but the project files were put away. There was only his personal notepad and 2 cups of tea, his usual dark herbal, and a second cup that was the same green tea I always took from the kitchen. He had made it in advance. He was expecting a long conversation. I sat down. He looked at me and said simply, "Tell me." So I told him everything. I told him about the parking garage, the voice I'd heard, the conversation word for word as best I could remember it. I told him about the archive folder, the Kuroi Partners document, the conversion clause. I told him that I'd opened the file without asking, that I knew that was a problem, and that I was telling him now because I would rather have him angry at me than not know that I knew. I talked for about 15 minutes. He did not interrupt once. His face was very still, his hands resting flat on the desk, his eyes on mine the whole time. When I finished, the silence lasted a long time. "I know about the contract," he said. "I thought you might. I've been working around it for 8 months. He picked up his tea. His movements were measured, deliberate, and I understood now that they were always deliberate, that the control he showed was not coldness, it was the effort of someone who had been carrying a very large weight for a long time and had decided that letting it show would only make things harder. My father signed that document during a period when his judgment was compromised. His doctors had already noted cognitive decline. I found the contract 4 weeks after I took over operations. He looked at the window. Kuro Partners knows they cannot touch the triggering condition while my father is alive and holds the shares. They have been circling, waiting, and recently they have started applying pressure directly. What you heard in the garage was not the first conversation of that kind. How many have there been? 3, he said. In parking garages, apparently, because they do not want documentation. Something about that, the specific calculation of where to threaten a person, made anger flare in me, fast and clean. "They called you a child playing at running a company," I said. He looked at me. "Yes. Does that—" I stopped. I did not know how to finish the sentence without crossing into territory he had not invited me into. "Does it bother me?" he said. Quiet even. "Less than they would like it to. More than I show." The honesty of that caught me off guard. It was the first fully unguarded thing he had said to me in 5 weeks of daily meetings. I said, "I want to help with this. Not just the Northgate project, the Kuro situation." "It is not your problem." "I know," I said. "I want it to be." He held my gaze for a long time. The city outside was starting its evening shift. Lights coming on in buildings, the distant sound of traffic thinning as the commuter hours ended. The office was quiet around us. The tea was getting cool. "Why?" he asked. Because you gave me a chance when you did not have to, I said. And because I have been in this building for 5 weeks, and I have watched you carry about 6 different impossible things without showing any of it to anyone. And I think that is very impressive and also very lonely. I held his gaze. And because somewhere in the last 5 weeks, this stopped feeling like a job to me. I do not know when exactly, but it did. Something shifted in his expression, very slowly, like a door opening that had been kept shut for a long time. Rion, he said. My name, quiet and precise. Yes. We cannot be complicated right now. Too much is unsettled. I'm not trying to complicate anything. I am trying to be someone on your side. A pause that lasted long enough to mean something. He looked at the table, then back at me. Then he reached into his jacket and pulled out a folded document, a copy of the Kuro contract, with margin notes in his precise small handwriting. There are 2 clauses I have not fully decoded, he said. The language in Section 4 is deliberately obscure. Second opinion would help. He set it on the table between us. I reached over and pulled it toward me. We worked until nearly 10. At some point, Mina left a plate of food outside the door without knocking. At some point, the city outside went from gold to dark. We argued about one clause for 20 minutes, genuinely argued, both of us pulling in different directions, until I found a case study from a previous Kuro partner's dispute that supported my reading, and he said, "You may be right," in a tone that made me feel like I had won something significant. When we finally stopped, both leaning back from the papers, I noticed that at some point in the last hour his chair had moved slightly closer to my side of the table. I did not comment on it. I did not look at him when I noticed it, but something warm lived in my chest for the rest of that evening. On the bus home, I pressed my forehead against the cold window glass and watched the city go dark outside and let myself feel the whole weight of what was happening. I was falling for someone who was careful and complicated and caring more than anyone knew. I was falling slowly, the way a season changes, not in one dramatic moment, but in 1,000 small, accumulating ones. The way he said my name, the cup of tea already made, the way he had said, "You may be right," like he meant it as a full sentence. I was falling, and I was not going to pretend I was not anymore. I was going to be here when he needed someone. That was the decision I made on that bus, in the dark, with the city lights blurring past. And I was going to hope, quietly, that somewhere on the other side of all the impossible things currently sitting on his desk, there was room for something that was not work. The storm broke on a Wednesday. I was in the middle of a review meeting with 2 of the senior project managers going through the updated Northgate timeline when Mina opened the door. She had the face she wore when everything was fine and nothing was fine. The professional mask pulled tight over something genuinely alarmed. She looked at me specifically. "Rian," she said, "you are needed on the executive floor, now." I excused myself and followed her to the elevator. On the way up, she spoke in a low, quick voice. Someone leaked the Kuro contract to 3 financial news outlets. It went live 45 minutes ago. 2 board members have already called. Director O'Hara's office called 7 minutes ago. The elevator doors opened on the executive floor. It looked like a building that had just been told a fire was coming. Assistants were moving fast between offices. 2 senior board members stood in a cluster by the window, talking in low, urgent voices. A legal team member was walking toward Kai's closed office with a folder pressed to his chest like it contained evidence from a crime scene. Mina stopped me outside the closed door. "He asked for you specifically," she said. "Before he asked for legal, before he asked for communications, he asked for you." That landed somewhere important inside me, but I did not have time to sit with it. I knocked once and went in. Kai was at his desk. His phone had a list of missed calls that scrolled below the screen. His laptop was open to what I could see was a financial news article, the headline large and aggressively punctuated. His hands were flat on the desk, and his expression was the most controlled thing I had ever seen a human face do. The kind of control that means something underneath is very loud. He looked at me when I came in. "Close the door," he said. I closed it. The noise of the outer floor vanished. Just us and the city outside and the screen with its screaming headline. "Tell me what the article says," I said. He turned the laptop toward me. I read it standing up, leaning over the desk. It was bad in the specific way that targeted journalism is bad when it has real material to work with. The article framed the Kuro contract as a deliberate concealment of a major shareholder liability. It used phrases like leadership transparency concerns and governance questions that have long surrounded the Matsuri heir. It did not mention his father's illness directly, but used the phrase declining principal oversight in a way that anyone in finance would understand. It included exact language from the contract, not the original, but from the decoded version Kai and I had been working from in the shared drive. I straightened up. "They got into the shared drive," I said. "Yes." His voice was flat. "Someone with board-level access. I have 3 candidates. Mina is pulling access logs. The article has language from our working documents. That means it was recent access within the last 2 weeks." "I know." "Okay." I sat down across from him without being invited because this was not an 8 o'clock meeting and the formality did not apply right now. "How long before this affects Northgate?" "Director O'Hara called already," he said. "She is not pulling out. Not yet. But she used the phrase monitoring the situation, which means she is watching and the Alliance Board will want answers." "Then here is what I think," I said. "We do not play defense." He looked at me. "Every instinct right now is going to be to contain this. Put out a measured statement, say you are looking into it, buy time. That is what Kuro Partners wants. They want you reacting. They want the news cycle to run for 3 days on their framing before you get to tell your own story." I kept my voice steady. "If you call a press conference today, not tomorrow, and you walk out there and put the contract on the table yourself and explain what it is, what it was, and what you have done to protect this company from it, you take the story back. You make it about your transparency instead of your concealment. If I do that," he said carefully, "I disclose my father's condition publicly." The weight of that sentence sat between us. "I know," I said, "and I think you know it has to come out anyway. Eventually, the share transfer has to happen. His condition is not something that will remain private much longer. If it comes out in a press conference today, on your terms, in your words, with your face on it, that is a completely different thing than if it comes out in someone else's article next week." He was silent, not the professional silence, a deeper one. I recognized it now, the silence of someone making a decision that involves more than strategy. "It is his dignity," he said quietly. "I know." I said it softly. "But the people in this room right now are not the ones who put it at risk. That was Kuro Partners. That was whoever leaked to the press. You protecting yourself is not the same as exposing him." Another long silence. Then he said, "Draft the press statement." "You have 90 minutes, I said, already reaching for my notebook. "I said draft, not annotate a timeline," he said, and there was something in his voice that was dry and deliberate and almost like a man who was using the smallest amount of humor available to him just to keep himself upright. We drafted the statement together. I wrote, He rewrote. We argued over 3 sentences, and he was right about 2 of them, and I conceded with more grace than I felt. He went quiet for an entire minute at one point, pen resting on the page, and I sat across from him in the silence and waited. Some things need a minute. At 3 o'clock, Kai Matsuri held a press conference in the company's main conference room with 12 journalists present and a live online stream. He was composed and direct and honest, in a way that I had never seen from anyone in a position of that kind of public pressure. He explained the Kuro contract, the circumstances under which it was signed, the steps he had taken to manage its risks, the reason it had not been disclosed earlier, and why that decision was defensible. He talked about his father in 2 sentences. Brief, dignified, not a performance. He answered 14 questions without deflecting any of them. When one journalist asked whether his disability was a factor in shareholder confidence, he looked at the journalist with absolute calm and said, "I run this company with my mind. Have you found the mind in question to be failing in some way?" The journalist moved on. I watched from the back of the room with my arms folded and felt something in my chest that was enormous and uncomfortable and had nothing to do with business strategy. 40 minutes later, my phone buzzed. Jashita, Director O'Hara. I watched the press conference. The Alliance's support for Northgate stands. He has good people around him. I assume you are one of them. I walked to the executive floor. Knocked. Went in. He was alone. The blinds were at an angle that made the room dimmer than usual. His chair was pushed back from the desk. For the first time since I'd known him, he looked genuinely and completely spent. The controlled exterior was still there, but it was very thin, like paper held in front of light. I crossed the room and held out my phone with O'Hara's message on screen. He read it, set the phone down, and closed his eyes. I sat in the chair across from him and did not say a word. I had learned from him that sometimes silence is the thing, that not everything needs to be responded to, that sitting with a person in a hard moment can be its own kind of help. After a long time, he said, "Thank you. You did the hard part," I said. "You gave me the shape of it." He opened his eyes. The room was quiet, the city going amber outside. His face, without the professional mask in place, was tired and real and something else that I did not let myself name yet. I do not usually, he paused, I do not usually let people help me. I find it difficult. I noticed, I said. Something in his expression shifted. Not quite a smile, but in the region of one. "Go home," I said. "That is the 2nd time you have told me to go home." "3rd," I said. "You are not counting the kitchen." Now something really did move in his expression. Warm and brief and unguarded. He began gathering his things. I stood and moved toward the door to hold it open, and he passed close to me. Close enough that I could have reached out in about 4 different ways. I did not. But I stood in the doorway after he had gone and looked at the empty office for a moment. At the desk where we had sat and drafted that statement in 2 hours, and I thought, I would do this again tomorrow. I would do this as many times as it needed to happen. Then I turned the light off and went home. The board member was identified on a Friday. It was not one of the older members who had always been quietly skeptical of Kai's leadership. The ones who had been with the company since his father's era and looked at Kai like they were still deciding whether he was real. It was a junior board member named Tachibana Ren, who was 31 years old and had been considered one of the company's rising talents. He had a good face for meetings, the kind that looked honest precisely because it had learned to perform honesty. He had been on Kuro Partners' informal payroll for 7 months, feeding them information, waiting for a moment large enough to be useful. The press conference had not done what Kuro Partners needed it to do. Instead of damaging public confidence in Matsuri Holdings, It had produced something the opposite, a wave of business journalists and financial commentators who characterized Kai's transparency as a marker of strong governance rather than weakness. The framing of Kuro Partners as a predatory actor trying to exploit a sick man's signature was almost universal. Shareholder confidence, which had dipped for 6 hours following the initial article, recovered by end of day and then climbed. 3 days after the press conference, Kuro Partners' legal team sent a letter that said they were reviewing their position regarding the conversion provisions. Kai's legal team responded with a 40-page document that Mina, when she delivered the printed copy, described as extremely thorough. I read 40 pages of extremely thorough legal dismantling and felt something very satisfying and slightly vindictive, which I was not going to pretend I did not feel. Tachibana was dismissed, quietly, efficiently, and with enough documentation to make any future claim of wrongful termination impossible. He did not even look at me on his way out. He looked at Kai once in the lobby, and Kai looked back at him with no particular expression, and that was the end of it. On Friday afternoon, I sat in my office, the project files for the upcoming Northgate follow-up meeting spread across my desk, and let myself breathe for the first time in what felt like 2 weeks. Real breathing. The kind where your shoulders actually go down. Mina knocked at 4:30. "He wants to see you." He was standing at the window when I came in. Not in his chair, standing with the support of the rail he kept on the office's east wall. He did it sometimes when he had been seated for too long. I had learned to register it without making anything of it, the way you register any ordinary thing about a person you spend a lot of time around. He was looking at the city. The late Friday light was orange and wide across the buildings. He did not turn around when I came in. "Close the door," he said. I closed it. I stood and waited. "I want to say something," he said, still looking at the window. "And I want you to let me finish before you respond." "Okay." "When you came into my office 6 weeks ago," he said, "I had already been told about your family's situation. I knew the financial pressure. I understood the desperation behind what you were doing, even while it was happening." He paused. "What I did not expect was what I saw in your face when you pulled back." My hands went still at my sides. He turned from the window then. He faced me, and his expression was open in a way I had only seen glimpses of before, fully open, the professional control set entirely aside. "You were horrified at yourself," he said. "Not performing remorse, not calculating damage control. Genuinely horrified. That is the face of someone who has just stepped outside the person they wanted to be, and who knows it." He held my gaze. "I have met a great many people who would have walked out of that office still justifying what they had done. You were not able to do that. I found it." He stopped. "I found it worth something." My throat felt like it was full of something I could not speak around. "I hired you because I was angry and curious in equal parts," he said. "And because in negotiations, anger and curiosity are both useful things to have on your team. But I also hired you because I wanted to know if the person behind that face in my office was someone real." He was quiet for a moment. The answer was yes. Substantially yes, more than I expected. "Kai, still not done." I pressed my mouth closed. "You have been someone I did not plan for," he said. "The Ohara negotiation, the Kuro documents, the press statement, every one of those was you operating from something genuine, not strategy. I have worked with a great many strategists. Genuine people are rarer." He looked at me for a long moment. "I am also not very good at saying this kind of thing. I want you to know that I am aware of that while I am saying it." Something almost like a laugh tried to escape me. I kept it in. I have kept people at a distance for a long time, he said. After the accident, it was easier. People have a way of either overmanaging you or underestimating you when you are in a wheelchair, and either version requires a lot of energy to push back on. It became easier to just not let anyone close enough to need to manage. He paused. But easy is not the same as right. I crossed the room. I did it slowly, deliberately. There was enough light in the room for him to see exactly what I was doing and decide if it was not what he wanted. He watched me come, and he did not move back or change his expression or say stop. I stopped in front of him, close enough that the space between us was the kind that means something. "I'm sorry," I said, "for what I did." I've wanted to say it properly, not as a professional note, not as performance, just as a real apology from me to you. You did not deserve any of that. I was in pain, and I was stupid, and I hurt someone who had nothing to do with my pain, and that is not something I can justify or explain away. I am sorry. He looked at me for a long moment. Something in his eyes was very still, very deep. "I heard it," he said, as a real one. We stood there in the orange Friday light, close, not touching, with 6 weeks of mornings and late evenings and drafted documents and cups of tea and parking garage secrets and press conference statements all sitting between us like the foundation of something. "Rion," he said. "Yes. If you ever do anything like that again," he said, and his voice had something in it now that was almost a certain kind of warm, "I will send the legal documentation directly to your door, with footnotes." I laughed, a real laugh, full and uncontrolled. I could not remember the last time I had laughed like that. And then Kai Matsuri smiled. Not a professional smile, not the careful, almost smile I'd seen a few times in meetings. A real one. Full, open, a little surprised at itself. It changed his whole face. It made him look his age instead of something older and more careful. And it made something in my chest do a slow, complete turn. He reached out and took my hand. His grip was warm and deliberate. He held my hand the way he did everything, with full attention, completely present, nothing held back. "Stay for dinner," he said. "There is a ramen shop on Northgate East. The owner is an old man named Fuji, who gives extra noodles to people who look like they have had a long few weeks." My eyes were doing something embarrassing. I blinked fast. "You researched old man Fuji?" "I went," he said simply. "Twice. He asked if I knew anyone from Kenji Street." He paused. I told him I was working on it. I looked at him for one long, complete moment. "Let's go," I said. We left the office together in the Friday evening light, and the city was very bright, and the ramen shop was 7 minutes away, and I had never felt less like the person I had been 6 weeks ago, and more like someone I actually wanted to be. 6 months later, the city is doing that thing it does in early spring, where the light comes back different, softer, with more yellow in it. Like someone has turned up the warmth on a setting that had been on low all winter. I'm sitting in the conference room on the 15th floor, going through the final Northgate documentation before this morning's groundbreaking meeting. The development breaks ground today. After 3 years of stalling, after 4 proposals and a land rights dispute and a press conference and a board betrayal and 40 pages of legal dismantling, they are actually going to start building today. My phone buzzes. It is a photo from Director O'Hara. She is already at the site, in boots and a yellow hard hat, and behind her you can see the Northgate Sunday Market in the background, its usual rows of vendors set up against the construction fencing like they are making a point, which they absolutely are. She has sent the photo with no caption. She does not need one. I set my phone down and look at the city through the conference room glass and think about how much has changed since October. The Curo Partners case was declared fully resolved 8 weeks ago. A court ruled their conversion clause legally unenforceable, citing the documented cognitive decline of the signatory and the absence of proper board oversight at the time of signing. Curo Partners issued no public statement, which was the business equivalent of leaving a room without looking back. Kai's legal team sent Kai a brief message that said simply, "Done." He forwarded it to me with no comment, and I read it 3 times and felt the specific satisfaction of watching something genuinely unjust get taken apart piece by piece. Tachibana is gone. The board is restructured. 3 new members were brought in, each vetted with a rigor that Mina told me privately was, quote, exhausting and completely necessary. Matsuri Holdings closed its strongest quarter in 11 years last month. The financial press, which had been skeptical and then cautiously interested, now largely describes Kai Matsuri as one of the most effective executives in the country. A magazine did a profile in February. He agreed to it on the condition that it focus on the company's operations and not on him personally. They mostly honored it. Kai's father passed away 10 weeks ago. He had been declining steadily since November. Kai visited every Saturday morning, early before the office opened. I did not know this for the first 2 months. I found out when I sent a message on a Saturday about a project note, and the reply came back 2 hours later, which was unusual. He told me when I asked. Just that. Where he had been, no more detail than that. I did not ask for more. The night his father passed, Kai sent me a message at 11:15. He is gone. I am leaving the hospital now. I was already awake. I do not know how I knew to be awake. I drove to the hospital. I sat in the waiting area on the ground floor. He had not asked me to come, and I did not go to the ward. I just sat in the waiting area with 2 coffees from the vending machine and waited, because sometimes you do not need to be asked to know where you should be. He came out of the elevator at 11:50. He saw me across the waiting room. He stopped walking for a moment. I held up one of the coffees. He crossed the room and sat in the chair next to me. I put my arm around him. He leaned against me just slightly. Not much, just the weight of a shoulder against a shoulder. And we stayed like that for a long time without talking. That was the most important moment I have ever been part of. I cannot explain exactly why. It was not dramatic. Nothing happened. But being the person someone leaned on, even just slightly, even just once, I think that is the whole point of being a person, when you break it all the way down. My family's company did not merge with Matsuri Holdings. That ship had sailed long before I walked into this office, and honestly, it was never the right ship. What happened instead is that Kai connected my father with a restructuring consultant who actually understood the specific sector my family operated in. And over 4 months, with real work and a new direction, my father has something he had lost somewhere around the time I was 16, a sense of possibility. He called me last month to tell me about a new contract they had signed. His voice sounded like his old voice, the one before the long string of failures. I sat on my kitchen floor after that call and cried, which I am choosing not to be embarrassed about. Daiichi, my brother, thinks I have changed. He does not say it kindly. He says it in the way people say things when they feel left behind. I think what he means is that I am harder to manage than I used to be, because I used to let his brand of easy cruelty slide, and now I do not. That is not change. That is arrival. Today is Thursday. At 7:58, I close my project notebook, pick up my pen, and walk out of the conference room and down the hall to the glass-walled corner office. I knock. "Come in," he says. The morning light is the way it always is in here. Clean and direct, falling across the desk at an angle that makes everything look considered. He is already working, a brief open in front of him, his pen moving in the small, precise way it does when he is thinking, rather than just noting. He is wearing dark green today. His hair is slightly unsettled on the left side, the way it always is before 9, which is one of my favorite things that I have never once told him. He looks up when I come in. Something in his face does the thing it has done every morning for the past 3 months now. A settling. A very small, very quiet kind of ease, the way a room feels different when someone enters it and the air decides to stay instead of leave. I sit in the chair across from him. "Good morning," I say. "Good morning," he says. He closes the brief. I open my notebook. This is our 8 o'clock, the same meeting we have had every workday for 6 months, which is now also the part of my day that I organize everything else around, which is something I noticed and accepted without much internal debate about 2 months ago. We go through the Northgate groundbreaking schedule. We discuss a follow-up proposal from an outside firm that wants to partner on the next phase. He has 2 questions about a clause in the partnership terms. I have one thought about the sequencing of the community outreach events. He listens to my thought, considers it, says he thinks I'm right about one part and not the other, and we go back and forth for 7 minutes about the part we disagree on, which is my favorite kind of conversation in the world. Then the official items are done. He closes his folder. I close my notebook. There is a moment. There is always a moment now, in this gap between the professional and whatever comes after, where neither of us says anything, and the morning sits in the room with us, and the city is out there doing its thing, and it is just us. "Fuji called last week," he says. "He wants to open a second location in the community space." I feel something enormous and quiet move through my chest. "Did you tell him yes?" "I told him to send a proposal to the development team." A pause. "I may have told him it would be looked at favorably." "You absolute softy," I say. He looks at me with complete dignity. "I run a company. I have no idea what you're referring to." I smile. He looks at his desk like he is not also smiling, but he is, and I know every version of it now. Outside, the city is wide awake. Northgate is 7 minutes away. The Sunday market is already set up around the construction fencing. Old Man Fuji is probably already open, already giving extra noodles to anyone who comes in alone. I did not expect this. I did not expect any of this. I did not expect that the worst morning of my life would be the first morning of the best thing that has ever happened to me. I did not expect that a man I had wronged badly and genuinely would become the person I organized my days around, the person whose opinion I value more than anyone else's, the person whose shoulder I know now and whose silences I can read, and whose smile is still the most beautiful thing I have ever seen and probably always will be. I did not expect to find that the thing I had been doing wrong for 22 years, pushing, forcing, taking, was not strength, and that the actual version of strength was sitting across from me every morning at 8 o'clock in a corner office full of morning light, with a pen in his hand and a cup of already made tea waiting on the table. "Ready for the groundbreaking?" he asks. "Yes," I say. He moves his chair back from the desk. I stand. We leave the office together the way we leave everything now. Together, without making a thing of it, because it is simply what happens. Love does not always arrive the way you imagine it will. Sometimes it arrives as the consequence of the worst thing you have ever done. Sometimes it arrives in a correction, in a second chance handed quietly across a desk by someone with every reason not to. Sometimes it builds in weeks of 8 o'clock mornings and late-night documents, and one parking garage and one Saturday cafe, and one press conference, and one hospital waiting room at midnight. And sometimes, if you are very lucky and you do the work and you choose to be better than you were, it becomes the most ordinary and essential thing in your life. The cup of tea already made. The chair moved slightly closer. The face that settles when you walk in. The 8 o'clock that you would never, don't, ever trade for anything. Kai is talking as we walk down the hall. Logistics, timeline, something about the press presence at the groundbreaking. I'm listening to every word. I'm also just watching him, the way I do now, without hiding it, without pretending. He glances at me mid-sentence. You are not taking notes, he says. I'm remembering, I say. He holds my gaze for one moment. Then he turns back to the hallway ahead, and I can see, from the side, that he is smiling. So am I. We take the elevator down together. The city is waiting.